Alright, welcome everyone to the Bentley Institute InRoads Plan and Profile Generator virtual class. This is the first in a series of classes we plan to do on the generator for kind of all levels of the generator, and so this is more of the basics, kind of intro to the little known areas of the generator, and maybe some of the more advanced folks on the line here will get a few hints too. And then in the future we plan to elaborate a little bit and move into more advanced topics on the Plan and Profile Generator. And so let's go ahead and get started here. Start by going over the agenda for today. I'm going to run through just a real-time demo. We're just going to go into it. I'm not really going to go through any of the tabs. I'm just going to load up some data and fire up the generator, let it run, create some sheets, and using existing just files that I have, a DTM and an ALG horizontal and vertical alignment. I've already got preferences set, so this is going to run fine. And of course, we're going to run through in part 2 and actually show how to set up these preferences. And just a note, as I run the first time, because we have two options for borders on our Plan and Profile Generator. We can use a cell as a border, or we can use a reference file. But for the first run, I'm just going to use a cell because that's the simplest way, and then on the next, after we go through the tabs, and at the very end, I'll run it again and we'll use a reference file just to show the difference. So that takes us into part 2 of the agenda. Basically, we're going to do an overview. Like I said, this is a basic intro, and go through the tabs, and I'll try to go through some of the catch points that people get caught up on. On the help desk here, we get a lot of calls, and there's a lot of common problems and pitfalls as you walk down that I see quite a bit, and I'll try to point those out as I go through the tabs. There's 8 tabs. It's a big dialogue, so we'll go through the dialogue and try to point out the basics of how this runs. Okay. Part 3, like I said, I'm going to run the demo again. We're going to use a reference file as a border instead and talk about the differences there, and of course the preferences. We're going through the tabs in part 2, so we're going to show you how to save that as a preference so you can get back to those settings and quickly cut more sheets using the same DTM and ALG. Okay. And part 4, I'm going to go back and show you with some of the edit tools we have on the views, and go back and change some stationing on the generated sheets. We're going to change some of the anchor points where these things insert as reference files, and this will all make sense a little bit later. If you're already familiar, this is already making sense. But we're going to actually go back and regenerate some views based on the existing set. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and move over to InRoads now. Okay, got that shared. Hopefully everyone's caught up there. Like I said, we're going to start with a real-time demo here in part 1, and I'd like to kind of intro a little bit just some of the thought process for some of the newcomers to the generator. The point of the Plan and Profile Generator, in case you don't know, is we basically want to set up referencing existing plan graphics. We have plan graphics whether in the file we're sitting in or in other reference files. We want to take that, decide on a station limit per sheet, and set a length per sheet and left to right offset for plan, reference that in a new DGN, and also we want to, in this case, we're going to reference profile in also. Well, it's not existing profile. The generator actually creates a new profile set, but it's all split up and ready to go into the views. In other words, it's one profile set we're going to create, but it's all split up, set up so the views can be referenced in to our new sheets that we generate. So we're creating new DGN files, and we're going to reference in our plan, we're going to reference in the profiles that we create in this working file that I'm setting in, and we're going to reference in a border file. And like I said, we're going to start with a cell here first. So I'm just going to quickly go to the 2 and run it with our demo here. So it's under the drafting pull down. And by the way, I didn't mention I'm in the release candidate Bentley InRoads 2004 edition. This is set to come out probably in a month or so, and I'm running on the new MicroStation V8 release candidate 2004 edition also. All but just 1 or 2 things will be the same if you're on a previous version. There are a few new features since the version MicroStation V8 release, and I'll try to point those out as we go also. So here we go. We're going to go to the drafting pull down and go to the Plan and Profile Generator. Okay. Notice I'm just sitting in a file here. I'm just in a 3D file. I have some, over to the left you can see I have just some contours viewed. That is from a DTM I have loaded. I have one active existing ground surface. And I also have an geometry displayed. You can't really see it, but we'll zoom in later. But right through the middle here, I have a horizontal alignment displayed in blue. And I have a vertical alignment also with this, and we'll show how that plays in. Alright. So we're going to start here, and I'm going to load my preference. Like I said, I already have this saved, so I'm going to make sure it's loaded. So I have all the right settings. Okay, looks good. I'm just going to hit apply. Alright. And ask me to identify location for the profiles. We're going to reference existing plan views, whether from other reference files or this file. In this case, it's just this file, but we've got to create the profile. So I just identify just like creating a standard profile window. Okay. So notice what happened. If you take a look at my DGN file name at the very top, I'm in a file called 18.dgn. This is a brand new file with the plan and profile referenced in. So I'm going to minimize the dialog just so we can take a look. My very last sheet, I'll zoom in here. Notice it stopped at an odd station. That's why I don't have plan running all the way to the end. I cut this on 1,000 feet. This is my plan view at the top. It's all clipped out, and this is referenced back from my main working file that I started in, what was called road.dgn. At the bottom here, and that's the clipping boundary, the blue there. And underneath, I have my profile that's it cut, and I had to place those in the main file. This is that last little one it cut, and then it referenced it into the sheet. And it's all relative to the border, and as we walk through the tabs, we'll come back to this existing sheet. That's why I cut it too up front, so we can make sense out of some of the tabs, because it's easier to show on a lot of those the options as we go through the different tabs. To actually come over here and just show you what it does, because we can regenerate these right on top. We can overwrite these files. Okay. So let's take a look at another couple sheets. Well, how can we look at the sheets? We created new DGNs in a directory I toted. It happens to be with the same directory. I'm using one directory for everything. But what we can do is we can just go to File, Open in MicroStation and go take a look at the DGNs, because we know where they are, and it increments the name. I said call it 1DGN. I used a C to 1, so it was number 1.dgn, 1, 2.dgn, and it just increments as it creates these. And it only depends on your length of the job, your station limits on how many sheets you generate and the length of each sheet. But I don't have to do just File Open to look at other DGNs. The generator has built in on the Sheet Index tab. I'll flip over to there, and I ran it, and I never even closed the dialog box here. I'm just running. Notice it indexed all my DGN files. That's the sheets, what we refer to as the sheets. So I'm indexing 1 through 8. Well, as you can see, if I highlight 8, it gives me the info on the view at the bottom. But notice that's the file I'm sitting in. So if I want to move back to maybe the very first sheet I cut, I can just highlight it in the list here and hit the Show Sheet. Okay, it's no different from going File Open, but it's nice that the generator does it for you. And notice the generator just minimized and got out of the way. So this is the very first station. There's 0, 0, where I started. Okay. So let's take a look at the second sheet. I already know we're going to have a few problems here. I did this on purpose so we could kind of see some of our edits. So I'm going to click on the second sheet, back on Sheet Index, and do a Show Sheet, and it'll go to the second DGN. Well, notice I was in a curve here. I was in a pretty sharp horizontal curve here, and it moved down. This my clipping boundary went down below my profile window. Okay, so that's a problem. I have to come back and fix that, right? And several different ways and opinions here, and different options on how to come back and correct that. But I'm just going to show you some of the tools that we can use to make this sheet look better. Well, what if all your sheets look like this? I can take a look. Normally if I was running this in the real world, I would go through and look at all these sheets. And if 80% of them are just perfect, but I have a couple, like I said, in this situation, where I have the curve, I would probably fix it sheet by sheet. I can come back and edit these views, and that's the edit part on part 4. But I would come back and make my edits per sheet where I wouldn't have to regenerate the entire set. So that would be the theory there. Well, if 85% are look like this and overlapping my border, it's probably worth the time to go back and reevaluate. Well, I probably want to, shorten my station limits, scale my border up. Why is this not fitting? Okay, because it's all based on scale and referenced in. All right. Well, let's talk about the way this references. I'm going to leave this here. I have my sheet index up, and I want to go back to the working file, because if you want to make changes and regenerate, you always have to be back in the working file. Because if you're regenerating the sheets, you're creating new profiles every time. I can't just go update the profile. I have to go back and regenerate the profiles. So I have to go back to the working file. So I can go to File, and I have it here on my recent file list. It's called road.dgn. Okay. So here's my plan graphics. I did a minus 100 and 100 left and right offset along this alignment down here. I'll zoom in real quick. There's my horizontal alignment. You can see the red. So I said, okay, clip me out in plan view on this file. Whatever I tell you to, whatever's in this file, grab it. So I have the alignment viewed in the contour, so it referenced that in and clipped it out and threw it into the sheets. Well, since this is a static, this is a live reference file into all those sheets that I just created. So, what if I go and just draw a line? I'm in here and not paying attention, and I just go draw some graphics. Of course that's going to show up on the sheet, because this is just a reference viewport into that this file here in my plan view. So if I went back to the sheet index on the generator and went to my very first file, okay, notice I have the line here. That's what I drawn. I drew it straight in the file, so it's a pure reference. So I have to be careful what I draw or what I do in this main file. I'm going to go back to the main file here. A lot of file switching here. Try to go slow here so I won't lose you. Okay. Same thing for the profile. These are just referenced in. Let's zoom in at the profiles I created. Okay. Split them up nicely here, so I have an axis on both sides and they can be referenced. And that's the power, right? Because this is one profile set. I could do this manually and chop these profile sets up and reference each, but if you got 100 sheets, you can see the time. So that's the purpose of the generator, of course. And since I have one profile set, as a lot of you know on the profile tools, if I come back and annotate profile, view vertical alignment, it's going to view in this entire profile set. These are just broke up, so the picture the reference file takes into the sheets will look good, right? But this is one profile set, so I can view active vertical annotation all the way down here, and it'll show up in all the sheets because it's just a pure reference. But there again, with that said, you have to be careful what you're doing and drawing around this area. You need to keep it clean. Alright, so that's kind of what we're going to do here. I'm just going to leave. I can leave those. I'm going to run it again, but I'm just going to create a new profile set. It'll be the same, but you don't have to delete those. And we're going to start with part 2 now, which is going through the tabs here and talk about just giving you an overview of what the setup is and setting the preference. So just like all commands, we're going to start on the main tab here. We have to decide, okay, well, what do we need first? Let's back up. We got to have a surface. If you're going to cut profiles, you got to have a DTM, right? So I have the DTM loaded here, and I view the contours of this file. All right, and I have one AOG loaded with a horizontal and vertical alignment. Okay, and the horizontals viewed. So first thing we have to decide is, do we want to see plan only, profile only, plan and profile? So you have an option. Let's say I don't have a surface. I just want to put some plan graphics in some sheets just to turn in. Well, I can do that. It'll just set the references for you, and it'll just pop them into sheets. You just tell it which plan graphics, the offset along the alignment, left and right, and the length of each sheet cut. That makes sense. And then, so you can just do that without profile. Well, if you want profile only, same thing. I can go and cut just profiles, throw those into the sheets. No big deal. You're not limited by one or the other. So we're going to do plan and profile. We're going to put them in different locations relative to a border. Okay, this will read your horizontal alignment. Will read the active. Of course, you can select it here and change that at the last minute. I know that's my active horizontal alignment. Plan views and station limits. This will make more sense when we do the edits. But use station limits is what you start with, because let's say you don't have any plan views, so you have to tell it how long to make the plan and what's the offset, left and right of the alignment to cut at. Plan views is after we've created. We come in here and we've created sheets and generated these views, which are at the bottom. You can see these were generated from that first demo run at the bottom. Okay, so I have plan views here. It has a start, stop, station, the name of the view, left and right offset, and the overlap, which we'll get to, and then the profile that I created. Right. Well, what if we wanted to go back and use these views? Let's say on the first sheet we wanted less offset because of that curve. We want to make the offset minus 70 on the left and positive 70 on the right. Okay, we can change that here. We could go to the view 3, change that. So you could have all your views have different left and right offset. Well, if you was to come back into this file and you load up, all your preferences and use station limits, it's going to overwrite because you only have one choice for offset. When you run it, it's just one. All these were 100. You know, you can't say on this sheet. So this is where you would change that. So you could come into these views, edit, and then you could regenerate the sheets based on your plan view settings at the bottom. Okay, so that's kind of nice. But we're just going to do station limits like I did before. All right. Generate sheets, a sheets area. If this is toggled off, basically it'll be a way to take a look at your profiles. If you turn this off and hit apply, all you're going to do is create profiles in your working file. And when I say working file, I mean the file you're sitting in here. All right. And I'll talk about the implications of what you have in your working file when you start and a little bit later. So that'll make sense. Okay. VDF, we'll talk about the VDF a little bit later, but it just stands for View Definition File. Basically it saves all these views here, where they are, the offset left and right, so we could come back at a later date. That's what the VDF saves. Well, let's say you didn't want to, you wanted to come in here, you got the views, you've done this 100 times, you know the way it's going to look. I don't need to generate host files, which are the sheets. So I can just do the VDF information and set up, it'll create this list here at the bottom. Okay. So then you could give it to someone else and they could come in, you load up your files, and they could generate from the views here. Okay, so you can open the VDF. And like I said, we'll touch on that a little bit later on where you save that. But we want to do host files, we want to create new sheets. Okay, last on here is this is the easiest part, station limits. We're reading the start and end station of this alignment by default. You can limit it, and the length is per sheet. How much plan view do you want to see per sheet? And really profile view too, right? Because it's, you know, it's controlling both in this case. All right. So we're going to move to the next tab. That's the plan controls. View name, there again, it has to keep up with all these different views, so you can give it a seed name. That relates back to this plan views area on the main tab. Okay. So it names it the view number and the station just to keep up, you know, as a placeholder, because all this is building references. It's just like the logical name ID on reference file. All this has to know where it goes. Okay, so that doesn't matter what you call it. Then the width left and right, that's the offset. This is plan controls. This is just plan for now. So width left is minus is to the left and positive to the right. Okay. How much plan do we want to see left and right of our alignment as we cut this? So this is going to define that length on the main tab, along with the width left and width right is going to define that clipping boundary that I showed. You know, that blue boundary that clips out all the rest of that plan so you don't see anything outside. So that's the size of your clipping boundary right there. That's the answer. Okay. So let's go back. We'll go continue. I'll take you there in just a second. Overlap. Let's say you're at an intersection and you want to see a little bit further past the station. You want to see an additional 25 feet. And you know, you can see your match line at the exact 1,000-foot interval length, but then you want to see an additional 25 or 100 feet. Maybe for utilities, you got a lot of utilities in there, and you've got like an event area where you really need to know what's going on here, a driveway, so you can add overlap to each. And that applies to all the plan views. So if you want to vary the overlap per sheet, you have to do it after the fact. You know, you come back into the, just like I showed you on where we edit these plan views over here. Each one has overlaps stored, if you remember. So we could come back and do these again after we generate them with one overlap, and we could actually have different overlap on every sheet if that's what we want. Okay, it's not common, but you might. All right, boundary chords. All right, this is what determines the final size of that clipping boundary. Like I said, you have the width left and right of the alignment. You have the length of the cut. So there's your box. Well, what about in a curve situation? As you're moving around the curve alignment, okay? The clipping boundary's got to decide. You know, we're doing it an interval the entire length, but it's not like a rollway modeler where you tell it drop a, go out and do a cross section, every so many feet. So boundary chords tells us, okay, how am I going to chord that clipping boundary? So let's let this take a look over at the sheet index and look at one of my existing from that last cut here to show this a little bit better. Well, it was set to 6 when I ran it. So I'm going to go to sheet index. I'm going to go to number 2 where that curve was. And I'm going to do a show sheet. Okay. Notice my clipping boundary as it goes along the curve. Well, I put 6 boundary chords. So this chords along my curve 6 times. Okay. What if you didn't want that? What if you just wanted a straight V at the top here? Well, we're going to set it to 2 chords, right? So let's just go back and do that. It's no big deal. We can run this again. Okay, I'm going to move back into my main file here. So I'm going to do a little extra run here just to show this. Okay, let's move it to 2. Okay, my preference should still be set. So I'm back in the main file, so I can hit apply. It asks me, do I want to regenerate? Gives you the last chance. You sure did you make a mistake when you hit apply? So yes. Profile, yes. And asks you where you want to put these profiles to reference in the new sheets. Okay, so I create a new profile set. Okay. Alright, so when the generator finishes, we'll go to sheet index. That's where we go to open our files. Go to file 2, do a show sheet. Okay. Notice the difference. It chorded along this curve 2 times. Okay, so that put our V. We don't have as nice clean clipping boundary, but that's okay. You know, you may not want that. So you can decide how often to chord around for this clipping boundary, which is in blue. The blue dotted line. And that's the same on the profile view. It clips out, you know, everything around it also. Okay. Alright, so I was on the plan controls. I'm going try to go in order here. And I will jump back to sheet index a little bit, but I'll try to go slow on that. So I'm going to set this back to 6 because I'm going to cut it again later. Well, the next toggle, force rectangular boundary. Well, basically what it does is one way to fix this situation where we have the curve here. Basically what it does is it does a due north. It looks at your very start station here in this sheet, and it basically goes due north, or not due north, but basically orthogonal, and goes to this to the rotation of the border, and it goes up whatever your left offset, and then it does the same down. All right, and then it does that on the other end of the alignment. It goes up whatever your left and right offset, and then it goes down, and then it builds a rectangular square based on those settings. Okay, to keep things like this from happening. But in this case, we need a little curve because you can see when I use this, I'm probably going to clip off. I'm not going to see hardly anything on the right side of my alignment here because this is going down station left to right. So let me just change that just to show you what it would do. I want to do force rectangular boundary. Go back to the road, my main file. Okay, just going to run it again. Notice these sheets, I'm leaving the same name. You know, in general, if you're running this over and over, you're going to go back and change the name of these new files you're creating. You don't have to. It'll just override it. But you still have to create the new profile set here. So I've got 2 profile sets in the file. So I'm going to go ahead and just run it again, regenerate. Okay. I have very few sheets, that's why I'm jumping back in here real quick. So now I'm going to go to sheet index again, go to our little problem sheet. Okay. So look what it did. It took 100 feet. It went due orthogonal to the border here, straight up, minus 100, positive 100. Same thing on the other end, and built us a box. Okay. So it's rectangular. Of course, we don't want that when we run it later because we're going to show the edits. But notice that we wouldn't need that in this case, right? Because if we need to see something to the right of our alignment here, which is in blue, I highlighted there, we're not going to see it. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the plan controls here, and we're going to turn that off just for when we run it again. Notice I'm just sitting in this file. It's okay to sit in the sheet. Just make sure you go back to the working file when you recreate this, because it's going to get confused. It's not going to know what you're doing if you're sitting in your generated sheet here. Okay. So model files is the next option. If you want to add a model file, all this is extra reference files to the plan view. Well, all I have is one plan view, which is the file, my working file, but I still need to go ahead and select it. You just to add a file here, you just click on the model files, and I pick my road here, which I did, and hit open, and it'll add the path to the list. So that's saying in plan view, reference this file, and then clip out based on my clipping boundary, like we just showed you how to determine the size of the clipping boundary, and then throw it into the views. Well, what if I had another sheet that had utilities, another DGN? Click on model files, grab it. So I'd have 2 there. What if I had another DGN with right-of-way lines? Something like that. Go back, monuments, some type of survey monuments. Go back, model files, pick it. So you may have 3. So that they're all referenced. They'll all be an individual reference into the sheet. And then they'll be clipped out based on your clipping settings. Let's just take a look here. We just did one plan background here, or plan reference. I want to go file reference into one of these sheets here. Notice I have 2 reference files. I have the one for plan and I have the one for profile. So that's my little viewport into my working file back over there. Okay. Let's say I had done a utility file and a right-of-way. Well, I would have 4 references. I would have 2 more plan references, no more profile, right? Okay. So let's go back. This nested attachments, this is new. This kind of helps a little bit with some problems we had in the past and a lot of CRs that we had to actually, when you pick a model file, you know, let's say they have this one file that has their contours, and customers have their contours, they have their right-of-way and their survey points and their utilities all in, you know, they got all these separate files, but they don't want to have to hit model files and attach all these individually. They just want to pick one file. So if you toggle on nested attachments in the V8, this is new for the V8 version. You won't see this in anything MicroStation J related, the older versions. But if you turn this on, it'll actually do a reference copy from the one file you select and go ahead and copy all of the files that are nested to it. So it's basically a one level deep nested reference attachment. So you know you can have everything referenced to one file, pick it, and it all comes into plan, and so it just saves you a little time. It's not live nesting like in, you know, it doesn't use any of the V8 live nesting. You know, in the future that may be an option, but you know you can't go 3 or 4 levels deep on referencing. And just so you know, a lot of people are using ortho. You can do a raster image attached to this model file. You can reference to the model file, and that'll come into plan also. Okay, or you can reference after the fact. So let's move to the next tab here, Plan Controls. There again, seed view name. That's this name back on the main tab. No big deal. Just to keep up with all the views. Set name. You always have to remember when you create profiles, we have to give it a set name. That goes into the DGN file. You know, there's a text node always at the lower left-hand corner insertion point of your profile. So that keeps up with the different sets. You know, if you have multiple sets, which I do. I have 3 or 4 now in the drawing. Profile preference. Well, the easiest way to explain this is to take a look at our create profile command. What we did, and I'll minimize this, if I go to evaluation profile, create profile, this is your normal profile. And I'm going to go back to the main file real quick also. Try to give you a little time there. Well, basically, if you've used our profile and cross-section tools, you know we have a lot of tabs. We have a lot of options for axes and grids and text and the way all that looks, right? Well, instead of having all these tabs set up back on the generator, instead of having on the profile controls having all these subsets and tabs, what we decided was, well, let's just have them set up all the different tabs as far as maybe exaggeration, window clearance, maybe, the axis, the way they look, you know, the color, the text. So you set all that up, and then you take advantage of our preferences, you know, or what I call window preference. Okay. You know, these are saved in the preference manager, but you know, normally I save this to default, but it's not a good example. You would normally save it to PNP. And you'd have the profile look the way, you know, you create a profile, get it the way you want it to look in the PNP, save that as a name, and then that name is called out over in the generator here. So this profile preferences looks through and says, oh, here's what he set up. This is what he meant. Okay, so I don't have to walk through all those tabs again. Okay. All right. So let me go back here and close this out. Okay. The vertical alignment option. This confuses a lot of people. This is not going to view your vertical when you create the profiles. It's not going to just add it in there. You will have to go back and view the vertical alignment. But what it does control is how this shifts. So basically think about this profile and elevation shifts, this surface area, and this vertical alignment. They're all kind of a group. Alright? So if you want to basically shift the profile, for example, if your surface line gets close to the top, you've got a lot of undulating change on your DTM ground, or on your vertical line. We'll start with vertical here. I'll go in order. But let's say your vertical alignment's moving quite a bit away from your surface line. The profile is zooming up at a steep grade. Well, when you cut the profile, we have to do a set profile height. We take the exaggeration versus this profile height, and that's the size of the sheet, right? So if this goes beyond a certain elevation, you're not going to see your vertical alignment. So what you can do is you can toggle on these profile elevation shifts. And what it'll do is if you're midstream along a sheet and you know you're at mid station and it sees, well, my vertical, you know, whatever vertical you select here, it sees, oh, that vertical's moved up outside my range. If you have shift turned on, one of these 3 shifts, it'll basically create you a middle axis right in the middle of that profile, and it'll shift the elevation. So you may have over here 950, and then to the right of the axis it'll be 930. It shifted it down 20 feet, so that vertical can continue. So it's not, you know, it's not going to match up. If you look across there, you're going to have where it goes up, and then it's going to shift it down and continue. Okay. And so that whatever you select here is what it's going to shift by. Or you can select none if you want to ignore the vertical and when it shifts. If you toggle on do not shift, it totally ignores this. It doesn't even matter. Okay, so I want it to shift about my vertical if it needs to. It doesn't in this case, but Just be aware of that. If you see an axis in the middle of your profile in one sheet, you know what's going on. Well, here's where we pick the surface. Which surface or surfaces do I want to cut the profile? Just like in the profile tools, we're cutting a new profile, so I have to decide which DTM do I want to slice the triangles through. Well, I want to slice existing. I only have one. But if I had multiple, I could pick both. Well, notice this blue here. Okay, it lets you select. Well, this actually means something, believe it or not. If you select or highlight in blue existing, I want it on, but I also click it blue here, or select it to the side. What that means is also take into account my surface line when you shift. So all these three work together. So what I'm saying with my setup is look at my vertical and my surface. When either one of those get outside the height of my lower limit or my upper limit of my profile window based on that size of the sheet, shift it. Okay? If you don't select it, it'll only use the vertical. If you don't make it blue. Okay? You can multiple select here with a control key, so if I had a existing and proposed DTM, I could select both. Maybe forget the vertical. I could turn this to none, and I could say shift based on two surfaces that I cut. Okay, so that's okay too. All right. So that takes us to the shifts. Where do you want to shift it at? I want to shift at a major. Do you want to just wait till you shift, move me an axis right in the middle till you get to a minor, or just where you need to? I don't care at the station. Whenever this vertical or surface or both get too close to the top or bottom, just shift it there. I don't care at the station. Or do not shift if you don't want to see shift. You don't care if your vertical zooms out, outside and you can't see it in some of your sheets. If you don't care, set it to do not shift. Okay? Profile height. This determines that this is in pure working units, whatever the working units of the file. What's basically the height of the profile. Use all those settings from the profile preference. Okay, the one setting that will combine to give us the total height of our profile back on our sheet is exaggeration, of course, because that's like a scale. So if I was to go into my first sheet that I generated previously, and I could do just a quick measure, kind of get, not exact, just get it close. So it's about 80 feet, okay? Or it's actually 70. I measured from the wrong place. That's okay. Go back to profile controls. That's my profile height. So I know right now, without looking back, that I had an exaggeration set to 1:1. My vertical exaggeration on the profile that's reading through the profile preference was set to 1. Okay? So you have to be aware, if I had set my exaggeration to 3, 70 wouldn't work here, because this clipping boundary would be way up over my plan when I cut these sheets, and it wouldn't look good. Okay? Profiles per column, that just decides the way, when you create these profiles back in the main file, this is just a couple settings that we couldn't move into the profile preference. This just decides the way they generate in here. Okay, if you want to get them out of the way, you don't want to go left or right, you want to go in columns up, maybe you've got some graphics out here, you can do that. So this is just for the way it looks in your working file. Okay. Same thing with horizontal spacing. This just gives you some spacing between those, as long as you have them, I've got left to right spacing of 400 feet between them. So you get them out of the way of each other in this file so they can be referenced cleanly. Well, if I messed up and clicked left to left here, 400 wouldn't be enough based on this length, and so I would get overlapping in my reference, and it wouldn't look good. Okay. Same thing for vertical. This is just the way they look in here, but you don't want them to overlap, of course, or because anything you see, like I drew that line in plan, anything you see in here, if they double up on each other, they're going to double up in the sheets. Okay. The margins. I'll just show you real quick back on a sheet what the margins do. It's easier to just show you. Okay. By default, the entry location of the profile is the lower left-hand corner. Okay. That's how I anchor this. I've got to tell it reference, and I'll show you this in a second, but I've got to tell you X and Y from the lower left-hand corner of this border where to put this lower left-hand corner of the profile. Well, if I didn't put margin, I wouldn't see any of my text or my tick marks. My clipping boundary, the blue, would be right on top of my axes. So since I have text outside here, and I didn't put it inside, I had to move my margins. I had to give me a little bit of margin on the bottom, a little bit to the left. Of course, left and right were equal, and just a little bit on top. I didn't need much, but I need quite a bit on the bottom. Okay, so you can see back on the profile controls, I've got 20 on top, and I've got 50 left and right. Okay, so that's pure units. Okay, so I'm going to go back in the main file just to keep this clean here, move on to the next sheet layout. Sheet numbering, that's just to keep up with which is which. That's this name here is a seed name. There's some advanced options to use this sheet number with some title blocking, but we're not really going to have time to go through that. But the sheet name is important because it adds this name to whatever you named your DGN below. Okay, well, What is host file? That takes us to this. What is a host file? That's our new file. You have the button here to go out and select it, but you're putting a new name in here. Now I would key in a name and hit save. For example, I keyed in one, O-N-E. Okay, and then it holds the path. But this is not created yet. This is a new DGN that's going to throw my sheets in. Well, over to the right I have host file content. I said single sheet in each. So I want one sheet in each DGN. Just remember you have the option to throw all those sheets in one DGN file, but normally you're going to do the single sheet in each. Okay, with that said, since you're creating multiple sheets depending on the length, you put a name up here. So it's going to be 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3.dgn, and it just names those and throws them in this directory. Okay, well, anytime in MicroStation, as you know, if you create a new DGN file, which the generator is going to do for us, you have to have a seed file. It's not just going to use a random seed file. Okay, so you pick a seed file. All right, I'll give you a couple hints on the seed file. What we need normally is an empty DGN file. Okay, preferably it needs to be, in most cases, it needs to be the same global origin. Don't need a global origin shift than your working file. You know, your working file is where you're going to reference the profile and where I'm going to reference the plan. Okay. All right. Some other things to consider. Your seed file, if you're using a cell for the border, your seed file has to have that cell library attached, just as the working file does. Okay. And I'll reiterate that when we get to the border and title tab. Just be aware, in general, you want a seed file. You pick it here, you go out and select it. In general, an empty file with no references attached to it. We don't use this for our plan. Remember, plan controls is where we reference our plan. Here we just want to use a blank DGN with the same global origin normally as our working file. And like I said, we need the cell library, whatever cell library, if we're going to use a cell for the border or the north arrow, we need it attached to the seed and to the working file. Okay. Alright, and we'll get to the border in just a second. Sheet layout. We want to go along alignment. That just means go along the curve, just as you saw in my boundary chords. And it takes the real coordinates. You snap in the coordinates of the sheet, it's going to be the same as what's really in your working file wherever you viewed or wherever your alignment exists. Well, we have the option to lay out in grid. Let's say my first sheet, you know, the lower left-hand corner of my border, I want it to be at 10,000, 10,000. If I toggle on grid and set it up like it is here, that's what will happen. And all the coordinates for all the sheets will be based on that. Okay, so you say, well, what about the second sheet? How does it know where it is? Well, that's where the spacing comes into account. So you're saying between each sheet, give me 100 feet. Okay, so the X on my very first sheet would be 10,000, and then my second sheet, the lower left-hand corner of the border, would be 10,000 or 10,100 for the X. Okay, so you can lay out in a grid if you don't need real-world coordinates. Okay, we also have the option. I'll go back to alignment. That's what we're using here. We also have the option to alternate plan and profile. If you want your first sheet to just have the plan, you know, you've got a big sheet, you just want all the plan in one big sheet, okay, then profile, then plan, then profile, it'll cut that way. You do have to tell it the first sheet location for the profile, okay, so that we'll use this location. If you use profile sheet first, if you toggle that on, that means the very first sheet will be a profile. The lower left-hand corner of that border will be 10,000, 10,000. If you do plan first, which is just done by toggling this off, it'll be 10,100, just like before. It'll use that spacing. Okay, but we're going to basically place both views in one DGN, like I said. All right. Clipping boundary. That's that blue. We can decide what level it goes on. We can use an InRoads name symbology there if we want to change the color, set that up. I'm just taking the defaults here. If we want a unique level, okay, for each clipping boundary. Each sheet have a different level, you know, alternate. The first sheet be on level 1, 2, 3, move up like that. Okay. Let's move. I'm going to skip the view layout for just a second and move to the border and title. Here's where we pick. Do we want to use a reference file or a cell? Here's your two choices. Okay, and currently I have a cell, a library attached to my main file. That's how I'm able to read this. That's why it's necessary you have it here. Well, like I said, but for the seed file or the host file to use the cell, to actually generate it, it has to be in the seed file too, this same cell library. Okay, if you're using the north arrow too, which is over here on the symbols and details, it has to be in the same cell library. Okay, so I picked the border that I want. I'll just tell you it's 22 by 34 is the size of this. It's in working units, feet, but that's okay, just for this demonstration. So it's 22 by 34 on the cell. You can put it on a level. You can do a unique level just like the clipping boundary. Here's your scale. Just to say where I want to scale, you know, my border up to fit the size of my plan. Okay, you're normally going to know that up front, and then you're going to fit your graphics or your references to it. Okay, at the bottom, I'll just tell you we have some symbologies here. built in for the cell option. You can come in here and turn on the horizontal alignment, the start station, and notice this location in paper units. Before the scale, which is up here, before you scale all this, it'll actually throw in some more text to these sheets, to each sheet. So we have some built in, like the total sheet number. Okay? And then these are in paper units, which mean before the scale, and then it applies the scale. Well, if I use the reference file option, which I'll do now in this example, these are not available. But what is available is this title block information. We don't have time to go into the title block, but you can actually put enter data fields with tags, certain tags, and separate, maybe in the name location, that where you put the name of the person who drew the file. So you can put that down there at the bottom and enter data field and tag it with our NCIV feature tag. And for the name, you could have it reference in. We have certain ones that you can use. The help file is pretty good on this, I will tell you. It tells you how to set that up. And in our advanced plan and profile virtual class, we plan to cover that. Okay. But right now I'm just using the reference file. My reference file was drawn exactly like my cell. Actually, my cell was created from the reference file. Okay. Sheet size just says what is the size. Well, let's talk about a couple of implications on the border here. The cell, if you create a cell for this, the lower left-hand corner, the very bottom of that cell or sheet, which turns into the sheet. This is a cell, as you can, and I'll do the info on it. Back on one of my sheets, it's a cell. But the lower left-hand corner, when you create the cell, needs to be at 0, 0, or the origin rather. I'm sorry. The origin of the cell needs to be at the lower left-hand corner. So that's because that's the insertion point. I'll go back to the main file. Okay, that's the insertion point for the border cell, is the lower left-hand corner. So that's where the origin needs to be, or it won't work correctly. It'll be in the wrong place. Well, for the reference file, I'll give you the implications there. The lower left-hand corner of the reference file needs to be at 0, 0, 0. If it's 2D, 0, 0. If it's Z, go ahead and put a 0 there too. Okay, that same lower bottom corner, because there again, the reference file border is going to be coming in, the location it's referenced is at 0, 0, and it needs to be the lower left-hand corner. And we'll talk about why that 0, 0 is very important when we get to the view layout in 1 second. Okay. One other little implication on the reference file. Be aware that we do have problems if you have a shifted global. You need to have a non-shifted global origin in your border reference file. You don't need to be any kind of shift. Even if your files are shifted, don't shift it. Leave it normal, because that 0, 0 needs to be in an unshifted global origin file. Okay, for some of our more advanced users. Okay. So I want to move to symbols and details. This is real easy. You just say, I want to use it, attach. You pick the cell. It has to be, there again, cell library on the main file and the seed file. Pick the scale you want to, normally it's going to match your border scale, right? So it makes it if you drew it all about the same units. And then the location in paper. We use these paper units to say where along the border. Well, let's go ahead and talk about location. That's from that lower left-hand corner. The lower left-hand corner, that's why it's 0, 0 on the reference file. It measures from that lower left-hand corner of the border. That's your paper unit location for all these different things that we're placing in at paper units. That's where that comes from, X and Y. Okay? Alright, so match lines. If you want to see some match lines, you have several options here. I'm showing plan match lines, and you can tell it where to start. I'm doing pure offset left and right of 50. You have different formatting options. This is just all, the way it looks. So before I go to sheet index, I'm going to jump back to view layout, the one I skipped. Well, for one view, that means I want one plan and profile view, because I'm doing plan and profile. If I was doing plan only, one view would be one plan view for sheet. Okay, this is an enhancement in the V8 version. We didn't have this in the past, back on the MicroStation J InRoads versions. There again, location. Well, you have to know the insert. You understand the X and Y's from that lower left-hand corner of the border in these sheets. But your question probably would be, well, what's the reference point? Where is that anchor point of the plan? Where's the anchor point of the profile? Well, the anchor point of the plan is the actual alignment. That's where we anchor it in. If I was to scale this location into the border and go in and look, it would be where that alignment starts on the sheet would be 20 times, or in the Y would be 20 times 16. Okay, so the anchor point of the plan is the actual alignment center line that you're using. Well, the profile, as you probably might have guessed, was the lower left-hand corner of the profile. That's our anchor point there. So when you're testing how to fit this into the border, this X and Y needs to be from the lower left-hand corner to the insert location of the profile, which is always, as we know from creating profiles, is the lower left-hand corner of the profile window. And there again, in general, we're going to keep this scale the same as the border, because it makes sense. You know, if you're doing X and Y from the border based on a scale, you need to scale these locations the same. But the nice thing about paper units is you can come back and rescale. Okay, and be aware, I'm just going to briefly touch on this, but I can actually, if I'm laying out in a grid, if I'm using the grid option back on sheet layout, I can actually lay out in a grid, but I can have multiple views. So I could have two views. I could have two plan and two profile views in each sheet. So I would have, let's say I just did plan only and I laid out in a grid. So I could put two here. Well, what I would have, if I put the distance between, okay, where they were out of their way, on the bottom of my sheet I could have from 0 to 10, and then above it I could have 10 to 20. So I could have basically two plan sheets in one. So this is a new option that we have, and this is where you decide distance between the plans. The first one, the very first sheet, which is the lower, first station, we use this paper units location to insert, and then the distance, if you want to go above it, you do positive. If you want to go below it, you do negative. So if you wanted to see your first sheet plan on that one sheet, right, on top, you'd put a higher in, and then you would put negative down to the second. Okay. But like I said, we'll go into more of that on the advanced when we do the more advanced plan and profile virtual class. Last but not least is the sheet index. VDF file, like I said, that saves all these views down here in the sheet index, and it like I said, saves whatever's on our main tab on these views. We're not really going to save any, but that allows someone, like I said, let's say we change the offset on, had a different left and right offset for all of our sheets. Well, if we came back and just ran station limits, that's all gone. But we can save that here, save as, to a VDF, and then someone else, or we can come back later and open it up and still generate and edit our sheets. But we saved all those different changes we made to each view. Okay? Alright, clip and boundary, when you cut these, just right off the bat, when you cut them, use calculate. I'm going to show you what use existing can be used for in a little bit. But we're creating a clip and boundary from our station limits and our boundary chords and the length of each sheet. So we need to be set to calculate when we start. And all this is for editing purposes at the bottom. Okay? So I'm going to make sure I set my reference file this time, just to show you the different options should look the same. I'm just going to hit apply, regenerate plan views, profile views, yes. Just going to put these up here, don't want to get them in the way, right? So it looks pretty much the same. As you can see, it generates, leaves us in the generator. Now we can go back and take a look at our first one, because it leaves you in the last file you created. So I can highlight in the sheet index the first one and do a show sheet. Now I'm back on the first sheet. Notice our north arrow came in nicely. It's oriented. All this is real coordinates if we snap in here. The only graphics we have in the file, of course, are these little match lines. Everything else in the, if it was a cell, the cell would be in the file too, but everything else is referenced, right? Of course, this is a cell too. Alright. So this is all reference built in. So we're in good shape. Alright. So I'm going to take a look at a couple more sheets here. Alright, before I go into some of the Part 4 edits, I just want to briefly mention, a lot of people ask, well, can I not just start in a working file, an empty working file, and just create my profiles there, and then use the model files back on the plan controls, just reference in all my plan graphics? Sure, but the reason I like to use the same, as one of my references, the same file that I'm sitting in, my working file, is, what happens, what if you create your profiles right across the coordinates of your plan, Because if you're sitting in a working file, that alignment's there whether you see it or not. So if you cut the profiles right across that alignment, that's all going to reference in and mess up your sheets. So that's one reason, just to, I like to use that always, I like to view something there and use that for one of my plan references. And then you can just keep adding as many model files as you want. So real quick here, so some basic edits here. Per sheet edits, in other words. So I'm in the sheet index, I'll go to sheet 2, I'm here. Well, how could I fix this? Well, my anchor point here, like I said, this is X from the border, Y, and of course it's scaled by whatever that's 20 scale, and then this is the insert anchor point. Well, I can move this up a little bit, that would help. Okay, so let's try that. Click sheet here, going at the bottom, notice at the bottom, here's my two views. I want to change my anchor and my Y on my plan, so here I go to my plan area, double click, or click edit button, whichever. So I go down to anchor, maybe 18 for the Y anchor. Hit OK. Okay. So now I've changed that sheet. Well, it's not going to dynamically update, as you know, because this is all referenced in. But what I can do is sit here and I can toggle on use existing, which means use the existing clipping boundary settings. I've already built this clipping boundary. I don't need to change it. Oh, sorry about that. I moved on to the next one. Alright, so sheet 2, I'm sorry, we've changed the anchor. We do have to do calculate again because it does, the anchor will recompute the clipping boundary. Yep, I had that backwards. Okay, so we stay on calculate, we highlight the sheet, we've already made our changes, we do a regenerate sheet. It says the sheet border will be recreated. Do you want to continue? Sure. Okay. And normally I would go back to the main file to do that, but that's okay since we're using the plan views. Notice how it moved this anchor point up a little bit, and then your clipping boundary was recreated. Well, what other edits can I do? Well, what I can do is I can toggle use existing here on my show sheet, and I can use a MicroStation tool, modify clip boundary, or the modify element command. I can click here. This is just an element in the file. I can move it around and up maybe, get it over above my border. Okay, I'm not doing anything real clean here. But I modified my clipping boundary just with the modify element. This is in one sheet. I'm sitting in it. Well, with use existing toggled, I can highlight it and hit show sheet. Notice it reclips, and I probably need to clean up at top and on the side here a little bit too. Okay, so just the show sheet command will actually reclip whatever my boundary changes per sheet. So I could go, if I just had a couple, you know, I could make those changes. All right, and let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to close here, and at this time I'm going to go ahead and conclude this session today.